it out if you haven't done it online. And with that, I call the meeting on Commerce to order. Michelle, please call the roll.
Senator Searpoy.
Here.
Henderson.
Here.
Bernsketter. Carter. Fitzwater. Gregory. May. McCreary.
Here.
Mosley.
Okay. We have a quorum, so we'll begin. First bill we're going to hear today is Senate Bill 365 by Senator Brown. Please come forward when you're ready.
Good morning. For the record, I am Senator Ben Brown from the 26th District, and I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 365, a bill that ensures our public water supply districts can keep delivering safe, clean, and affordable drinking water to Missourians without being trapped in a failing system due to an unrealistic voting threshold. Water is a lifeline, and maintaining a reliable system is no small task. When a public water supply district finds itself unable to provide top-tier service at the lowest cost, whether due to massive capital needs, regulatory pressures, or staffing challenges, selling to a capable investor-owned utility is often the best, if not only, solution for its residents. Currently, that process demands a 2/3 majority vote from district residents, a bar so high that it's nearly impossible at times to clear. Senate Bill 365 lowers that threshold to 4/7, offering a practical path forward while preserving community control. This isn't about making sales easy, it's about making them possible. The 4/7 threshold mirrors what we already use for other governmental financial decisions, such as general obligation bonds. It's a balanced standard, higher than a simple majority, but far more achievable than 2/3. A few years back, I was told that there was a bill proposed that used just a simple majority, but there were some stakeholders that felt that it was too low. So this adjustment reflects a compromise based on that input, and one I believe that strikes a responsible balance based on several reasons. For one, the circuit court can reject any dissolution petition if it finds that it is not in the public interest. Next, the Public Water Supply District's board must also vote to approve it in order for it to appear on the ballot in the first place. Finally, even if approved by the voters, the Public Service Commission still must approve the sale and determine that it is not detrimental to the public interests. So why do districts need this option? Some face steep infrastructure costs that larger utilities can handle with less rate shock. Others struggle with new regulations, retaining certified operators, or delivering safe, efficient service without economies of scale. A sale can bring expertise, resources, and much-needed stability. Compare this to municipal water systems, which only need a simple majority vote to sell. SB 365 maintains a higher standard for public water supply districts, but ensures a standard that is at least obtainable, when such a move is in the best interest of the community. This bill is about fairness, flexibility, and ensuring access to a safe water supply. I urge your support for Senate Bill 365, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Do you know the history of the 2/3, how long that's been in place, and what made it happen? Because it is a high bar.
Yeah, I don't know the history of it. I know that I believe that was a standard that was put into place to create these entities originally. I think the issue is that, you know, if you need access to water, that's one thing. But when you have a system that's clearly failing, when you have the quality of the water supply that is diminished to the point that could potentially be unsafe, I think that we need to have an option to where people within that community are able to make a change. And with the higher threshold, I think it creates a real problem because, you know, there's not necessarily a lot of resources that are going to be put into funding a campaign for something like this. I think that there is probably hesitation if somebody was not educated about what this proposal on the ballot would actually do. There would be hesitancy. They would just see something changing with their water, and just the hesitancy that creates,
Right. No, I can understand
I
that.
mean, would serve as a real obstacle.
Just like in the bill I handled, the QUIP thing was in question, and the history of QUIP was the Callaway nuclear power plant cost overruns is what motivated QUIP to pass, and I just wonder if they have something like that on the two-thirds majority for selling water companies.
I do have some witnesses testifying here today that probably could speak more
Okay.
to the history behind that a little bit more than I could.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Senator Carter.
Senator, thank you for bringing this bill forward. Can you just please tell me, if you know, what the current vote is to create a water district?
I believe it's 2/3.
So it takes 2/3, but then it would be 4/7 to dissolve it?
Yeah, and there are real world examples throughout our state, and I believe some of our witnesses will speak to that, of situations, areas in our state where there were serious issues with the water supply, though they were unable, or at least having much difficulty getting something passed, and so people were stuck in that system. They clearly lacked the resources to provide a safe, stable supply of water, but yet their hands were tied. So I want to be able to ensure that communities have options, that we're not setting an impossible threshold to where people are trapped inside one of those situations. I think access to clean, efficient water source, I think, is the very, very least that we owe the people that we represent, and I think that this provides a more realistic opportunity for us to do that.
Yeah, I just am wondering if we might be able to have a conversation about, I just worry that it's more difficult to create one than it is to dissolve one, and so just want to have that conversation about it.
Yeah, and that's something I think that Senator Searpoy was kind of speaking to the history behind that, and like I said, I think there's some people here that could probably give a little bit more background information about why that standard was originally created to create one of these entities, and I think that could probably shed a little insight on that.
Yeah, I'm also curious to know if there was a municipality that was interested in purchasing back, or, I've got a couple of cities in my district that they own the septic, they've sold off their water, and there's conversation about what it might take to be able to reclaim that infrastructure if they need to. Obviously, I'll need to ask about the process of that, just out of curiosity to see what and if that is possible. But just, anyway, appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, of course. I know that, we've spoken. There have been issues, I know, in your area, not with water necessarily, but with other utilities, and you have a company or a system that's clearly failing. Like you understand as much as anybody, having some flexibility to be able to make a change if the
Right.
current provider isn't living up to what their obligations should be.
And gratefully, that isn't water in my district. But
Yes,
anyway,
yes.
thank you for the dialogue.
I was
Appreciate
trying,
it.
yeah, didn't want to call out any company in particular, but I
Yes.
think you know what we're referring to.
Definitely do. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. How many people want to testify in favor of this bill? How many want to testify against? Okay, that's not bad. First one in favor, please come forward. Bring your witness forward and let us know who you are.
No, I just think it's great that so many people are here today to hear this important bill. Thank you to all the other lobbyists for coming. So Matt Jesse, Director of Government Affairs for Missouri American Water, proudly serving 1 out of every 4 people that are drinking water in the state of Missouri. I want to thank the sponsor and the chairman for having this important hearing. I'm obviously testifying in favor. I want to address a few questions that the sponsor got that I can hopefully answer. So in terms of the history of this, I just looked at it. Section 247 220 was created in 1978 when that statute was put in effect to create water systems, public water systems. And to Senator Carter's question about if it takes 2/3 to create, and now we're creating a system where it would be 4.7s to dissolve. I think the reason the bar was high originally to create these is because they were going to be allowed to bond and take on debt to, obviously lay the infrastructure for the public water system. So that's why it was, the bar was higher to begin with. Thought I'd also address some other questions I've gotten, especially on the House side, as this bill has gone through the process. One was, is 4.7s too low a percentage to dissolve a public water district? And my answer would be, well, it takes 4.7s to issue bonds for a municipality. So if a 4.7s is good enough for a municipality to take on debt, certainly 4.7s should be enough of a percentage for a water system to dissolve and sell itself, which would be relieving the community of debt in many cases. So I guess the other question would be, would there ever be a situation where an investor-owned utility would engage in a hostile takeover of a public water supply district? I think that may be the misconception. The answer is no. I mean, as the sponsor outlined, there's the circuit court would need to approve the petition. The board would need to approve this going to the voters. And even then, even if the voters approve the process, the PSC can still reject this dissolution after it's been completed. So with that, I think I've hopefully answered as many questions as I can, but I'm happy to take more.
Thank you. So historically, the PSC sometimes gets involved and asks you guys to take over a system. So when that occurs, usually it's because they can't meet the environmental standards or some other requirement that they issue now. Does that always go for a vote then? It has to get 2/3 of the people living there to agree to it? Or is that when the PSC instigates it, does that go around that process?
So I believe there still needs to be a vote that takes place, but the PSC can step in and encourage it.
So if somebody needs to do something because the EPA is issuing new standards or is enforcing standards, and they don't get 2/3, what happens then? Is it just a standoff, or how does ultimately, if locals don't want an IOU to come in and buy them, is that occurred, or is that something? How do they work around that?
So if your question is if the locals want to sell,
Don't want to sell.
It
does not get 2/3. It gets 55% instead of the 2/3.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a way around that, or you guys just walk away then and say?
No, we walk away.
And so the PSC then just doesn't really have because they don't have any control over the local water boards. They're
No.
just, okay. Okay, well, thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Anybody else in favor? First person in opposition, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Fred Dreiling today representing the Association of Water Districts. We're a group of rural water districts primarily located in Cass, Jackson, and Clay County, and we would like to go on record in opposition. I spoke briefly with the senator, and he did mention that originally this bill was going to place at a simple majority, and we certainly had a lot more heartache when it was at that than as opposed to the 4/7. But as to Senator Carter's point, our point is if it takes 2/3 to create this district, and that's when you use the bonding, we believe it should take 2/3 to dissolve it. And if there's a bunch of problems within that water district, I would think that its citizens, its customers would want to sell, and that 2/3 should be obtainable. So for that, we'd like to go on record in opposition. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Has there been any water districts formed in the last few years?
I don't know. Not certainly that I deal with, but Trent is coming up with me behind me with MRWA, and he might have some more information on that.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
Next in opposition, please come forward. As he blames you for. You better be ready, Trent.
Good morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Trent Watson, registered lobbyist here on behalf of the Missouri Rural Water Association, respectfully in opposition to the legislation. We have 900 plus members of our association, and we're not opposed to when a water district decides that they want to sell, okay? But as stated previously, these are very difficult things to create, and they should be equally difficult to dissolve. These are an asset, right? This is, lots of times, this is multi-million-dollar asset that is going to be sold. And in some cases, I think the most recent one that I know that went up for sale was up in Sheraton County in Brunswick, Missouri. And we had a board that half the board wanted to sell the system. They put it up for sale. It failed, vote of the people. Then it went back and the board changed, and that board decided to reinvest. Sometimes it's tough for these boards to say, look, we're going to raise our rates on our neighbors and friends, and that's sometimes tough for them to do and that decision to make, but that board decided to reinvest in that system and do the upgrades needed. So I would argue that the system works just the way it's supposed to right now. I don't have any of my membership clamoring saying, Trent, we're trying to sell and we just can't. So that's really why we're in opposition to the legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So in that case, you used up at New Brunswick, I think.
Yes.
What was motivating them to, was the PSC involved, or was the EPA, or?
So the PSC doesn't get involved.
Right.
We don't fall under their purview. So DNR would be the one that would come in and say, hey, your water quality is not up to where it needs to be. There are other people out there that you could buy water from. We have a lot of systems that buy water from Missouri American, right? This isn't an advantageous relationship that we have.
Is it ever the sewer side, or is it always the supply side?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
So what happens if you've got a water, so your argument is, if it's bad, the people there will vote for it and move forward. It's
Drinking water, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody else in opposition, please come forward. Anybody for information?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Arnie C. A.C. Dino, State Public Advocate. I submitted my form online already. I'm opposed to this bill. This is a huge decision. There's a huge investment of capital by the people of the water district. The last one to sell that was on the ballot was about 3 years ago that I know about. It wasn't a district, but it was the city of Eureka. They had some water quality issues and some capital improvement issues dealing with calcium and that type of thing, and so they sold to Missouri American Water Company. 2/3 of the voters is needed to stay in law. That 67% of the people shall have to make the important decision. This is a huge question before voters. It's one of the basic assets to live as a human being and to sustain oneself, and therefore I'm opposed to this Senate Bill 365. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody have questions for Arnie? Thank you very much. Anybody else in opposition? Anybody for information purposes? Thank you, Senator Brown. That'll conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 365. Next up, we're going to go executive session eventually when I get some members here, but right now we'll go into Senate Bill 487. Senator, if I get a quorum, I may put everything on hold momentarily and take a vote. So go ahead and proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Senator Schroer on Senate Bill 487. This is the energy deregulation bill aimed at putting consumers back in the driver's seat when it comes to their energy costs. From 2008 to 2023, Missouri ranked 4th in the entire nation for the biggest jump in electric rate increases. This bill is a monumental shift in how we've done business as usual in the state of Missouri, moving toward the free market to tackle energy costs, consumption, and production. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your work on the energy issue over the past several years. As stated on the floor, even though I ultimately didn't vote for Senate Bill 4, I greatly appreciate and respect the hard work that you put in and your staff put in the many hours negotiating on the bill. Thank you for taking time to have a hearing on this bill, which in my opinion could revolutionize the energy market in the state of Missouri. In short, this bill allows customers to choose an alternative energy supplier, first impacting large companies, and then shortly thereafter, smaller customers. The utilities would remain the monopoly provider for the wires, the distribution under the PSC. Senate Bill 487 requires the unbundling of rates to enable separation of wires, the distribution charges, from competitive generation charges. Further, utilities remain the purchaser of the default supply service for customers that choose not to have an alternative supplier. Many states are moving away from the monopoly-style regulation system, and as the experts and consumers that are here today will tell you, there are many reasons as to why. Sounds like a beautiful wind chime that you have there. I ultimately became interested in this legislation as I saw energy costs for our constituents skyrocketing year after year. In talking with some of the experts that will testify here today, it became abundantly clear that Missouri needs to embrace the free market where competition benefits the consumer and where innovation is a requirement. Nearly half of the states are moving away from these monopolies, which has shown us that deregulation isn't just good policy, it's the American way. Freedom, choice, prosperity, it's ultimately what I'm fighting for in this bill. And I know my phone is blowing up right now. I'm supposed to be in another committee. I will say this is a very, as you guys know, this is a very complicated issue, and we just want to do this right, and I thank you again for having us here today to have this hearing.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody have any questions for the Senator? Let me ask, how many people want to testify in favor of this bill? How many in opposition? Okay. I may go back and forth for a while just to cut through it. So the first person, and you might talk to your group, I should have said this earlier, the most knowledgeable person maybe go first because we may cut back in time as we go forward. So the first person in support, please come forward.
And Senator, I might pop out to go exec in another committee, but I'll be back.
Good morning. Chair Serpiat, Vice Chair Henderson, Ranking Member May, and members of the Senate Commerce, Consumer Protection, and Energy and Environment Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the merits of Senate Bill 487, which promotes and advances the competitive electricity market in Missouri. My name is Melville Nickerson. I serve as the Director of Government Affairs for the Central Region for NRG Energy, Inc. NRG is a publicly traded Fortune 500 company. We generate electricity for sale on the wholesale market, and we sell natural gas and electricity to industrial, commercial, and residential customers, saving our customers money and offering innovative services to meet their needs. In the Midwest, specifically Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, we serve over 1 million customers and have dozens of employees. In Illinois, NRG operates a 1,300 megawatt coal plant, and in 2015, we spent over $200 million to convert a coal plant to natural gas. Ultimately, our natural gas plant was uneconomic and closed in 2022. I note that none of these costs to operate our plants was funded by ratepayers. NRG makes prudent business decisions based on our investors and market conditions. 25 years ago, when the Ohio legislature deregulated its energy market, Ohio legislators, like Missouri legislators today, were cautious, and rightfully so. What if the markets did not develop as expected? What if new generation did not get built in Ohio? Now, these many years later, I think we can say without a doubt that Ohio has a robust energy market, as do other deregulated competitive energy markets. And if you pass the reforms that are contained within Senate Bill 487, it will help to move Missouri forward with a stronger competitive energy market that better serves businesses and residential customers in Missouri, and also sends a strong message about growth and development in Missouri. I will focus my comments on one key element of Senate Bill 487, a pro-consumer bill that aims to keep electricity costs low and drive customer benefits through competition. Competitive electric markets saved Ohio ratepayers nearly $3 billion per year, $3 billion annually since 2011. According to a Cleveland State University study titled 2024 Update on Electricity Customer Choice in Ohio. Allowing residential, commercial, and industrial customers to shop for the lowest price for electricity will ensure consumers receive the lowest price for their electricity. Senate Bill 487 empowers consumers to shop for electricity based on transparent price and their personal choice. For example, NRG's Choose to Give program in Ohio, a partnership that pairs customer electricity with philanthropic donations, has generated over $6 million in donations to Nationwide Children's Hospital. Across 2023 and 24, NRG delivered 45 million airline miles to Ohioans through an innovative airline partnership. Through these programs, NRG gives all participants the power to visit loved ones and or take a vacation. If you focus just on the cheapest price per kilowatt, we have a very competitive price, as illustrated by the high number of customers we serve in the Midwest. Bottom line, consumers win when they're allowed to choose what works best for their family and their businesses. NRG is supportive of Senate Bill 487 as introduced. I want to thank Senator Schroer for introducing this important piece of legislation, and to the many leaders in this chamber and in the House who are driving toward a more competitive, robust energy market in Missouri. I hope this committee will look favorably on the passage of Senate Bill 487. Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to try and answer questions from this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Yesterday I was talking to somebody from your side of the issue, and it was mentioned that I think Pennsylvania was used. There is 35 to 40 providers that when you go to the website, you can choose to provide your energy. If you're, and I guess, if you're one of the people competing in one of these states that have this, and you sold a certain amount of electricity, since you put an electron in, you don't know what electron's coming out. It's in the grid. Does a PSC oversee if there's a shortage, if there's a brownout, who's causing that, who's not providing the power they've promised?
My understanding, Senator, is the customer's needs are affirmed by the supplier, in a hypothetical case, NRG. So there will be ample supply of energy when it is needed by the customer. We make sure that we meet the customer demand.
Who's overseeing that? Is the PSC that have control? I mean, if there's a brownout and somebody's promising and they've sold 100 megawatts, and you've got 45 different companies doing that, and they all promised however much they've sold, and somebody comes up short, I guess they're monitoring the inputs as well as the outputs. So is the PSC have overall responsibility for that then? Do they punish a company that's not providing the power they've sold?
It's an excellent question, Senator. Let me pivot back to Illinois, a state that I'm familiar with. I cover that state. I do not cover Pennsylvania. Okay. So in Illinois, the answer is yes, you are correct. Our Illinois Commerce Commission is the equivalent of the Public Utilities Commission. They provide oversight for the suppliers of both electricity and natural gas. Primarily, they ensure that they are operating and meet all reasonable business standards. They are held accountable for marketing and providing service. If there is any inappropriate business actions that would occur, hypothetically, then the Illinois Commerce Commission has the authority to investigate. They also have the authority to suspend a license, and at the conclusion of an investigation, they have the authority to revoke a license.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Senator McCreary.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. I feel like your testimony was targeted directly at me since my parents live in Ohio and they get their electricity through the Farm Bureau. So I'm sort of surprised Senator Gregory didn't sponsor this bill. Farm Bureau selling electricity? Okay. Anyway, just wanted to talk through what that would look like for the customer, though, in a state like Ohio or Illinois. So they get their actual bill, like, would they get it from the Farm Bureau electricity department, or do they still get their bill from the investor-owned utility? What does it look like for the customer?
That's a great question, Senator. I'm not as familiar with the Farm Bureau, so please let me speak to...
Well, just speak generically as like a reseller.
Yes, absolutely. So if you're an NRG customer, there are two prevalent models. The first, as you mentioned, is that they would receive the cost for their electricity, their monthly usage, on the investor-owned utility's monthly bill. That is one model. A second model, which is in Texas, there is a separate bill that is sent to the customer from the supplier.
Okay.
This is an important key factor because it increases customer information, contact, and loyalty. So, for example, in Texas, we're able to communicate with the customer through text and email updates in addition to their monthly bill. So, for example, if your energy usage in one week is X, we notify you and say, hey, based on your current energy usage, here's what your projected monthly bill will look like. If you want to lower your monthly energy bill, take these following actions. So those are just some of the innovative ways that we attempt to serve our customers.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for testifying. I'd like to hold on for a minute. Pardon me? I'd like to hold off for a minute. We're going to go into executive session real quick so other members have things. So I move that we go into executive session. We have a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. We are in executive session. I move that we bring Senate Bill 489, is that right? 489 before the committee. Do I have a second? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is before the committee. I now move that we do pass Senate Bill 489. Do I have a second? Second. We have a second. Okay, 49 for everybody's purposes was the bill we heard, I think, last week. Is that right? It's kind of been called forced relocation for road widenings and things like that. So these companies that move that stuff can be reimbursed for it. It was sponsored by Senator Brown. Any discussion on that bill? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I know you and I spoke briefly offline about this. I'm going to end up voting for it, but I want to continue to work on it. I've spoken with the commissioner in one of my counties, and there have been, they're getting ready to completely rework a couple gravel roads. I don't know if that means pull ditches and re-rock them, replace culverts or not. He actually messaged and brought this specific legislation up, and he goes, we've got some utility people that have laid lines through the, like they just put their conduit through the culvert. And I don't think that that should be something then that the county has to pay for.
Is that not a right-of-way? I mean, it's just, they just did it. If it's not a
I don't
right-of-way.
know. I mean, we've got stuff, but I mean, nobody where I come from now still has a landline. So the landline must have been very poorly laid because road graders find it often, and it's just laying on top of the road half the time out there in Saline County. But like I said, we're all on cell phones now. I don't know what kind of line this is that my commissioner was referencing, but the conduit was run through the culvert, like you can see through it. And then the line was laid through it. I just feel like the county shouldn't be responsible
Sure, I understand.
for relocating something.
Well, as you said, I think once this gets to the floor, they're going to be, actually testimony last week, I thought there was a lot of good ideas about maybe carving out the very small counties that don't have the funding and things like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of work done on this bill before it moves forward on the floor. So I appreciate that.
All right, thank you.
Any other discussion?
I just want to echo the sentiment that I'm conflicted. I've been in touch with my municipalities and my commissioners, and so I appreciate the efforts to continue the work.
Sure. Okay.
I'm just going to say I'm kind of the same place. I'm hearing some of the same things from, I'm going to vote to get it out of committee, but I've got some of those concerns.
I think there's several people that feel that way, so I appreciate that. So, okay.
Me too. My
So
counties do not
maybe
want
we'll
it, and I'll
vote-
be voting no.
Maybe we can vote maybe. Okay, with that, Michelle, please call the vote.
Senator Searpoy.
Aye.
Henderson. Aye. Bernsketter. Carter. Fitzwater. Gregory. May. McCreary. Mosley.
By a vote of 5-2, we've voted to move this bill to the floor to work on more. So with that, I move we leave executive session. Do I have a second? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. We're out of executive session. We're moving back now to, I keep covered on my stuff. What's this bill we're on? What is my thing? There it is. Back to Senate Bill 487. The first person in opposition, please come forward. Oh, say.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. You asked that we send our most knowledgeable witness up first. Instead, we've chosen to send our best-looking witness up first, so.
That's sad on both cases.
To talk to Senator Weber about that comment. Okay, my name is Jason Clint, and I'm the Senior Director for External Affairs here at Evergy in Kansas City. Proud to be here to represent our over 5,000 employees. Just want to make a couple of quick points, and then happy to move to your questions. But the promise of deregulation, as you just heard, is to lower rates, and that simply has not happened. Deregulation began in earnest in the 1990s. You'll remember the name Enron. It was enabled by deregulation. There are about 13 states that are fully deregulated. I'm glad the proponents talked about Illinois. I used the best source we have on rates nationwide, the Energy Information Agency, EIA.gov. You can go there and you can look at rates for any of the 50 states. So I did some of the work for you. I looked at Illinois. Illinois, 11.75 cents per kilowatt hour. In Missouri, the average price, 9.48 cents. You don't have to take my word for it. You can look at EIA.gov. According to Wells Fargo, Missouri is in the bottom 10 of price increases over the last 5 years. Illinois, pushing up toward the top 10. I have no doubt that you can get a better price if you're a big company. You know who doesn't? Your constituents. After 25 years of deregulation, these 13 states are now 7 cents higher than regulated states. The price gap that remains is undeniable. Simply put, prices are higher in deregulated states. Since 2017, Evergy's own rates have gone down, or have only gone up by 2.3% at a time of 21% national inflation. The trend is actually the other way. It is to re-regulate. That is, deregulation has been such a disaster that states have reversed themselves. In Montana, 5 years after deregulating and selling off those generation assets, Montana brought them back. Why? Cheap electricity from dams was being sold to Pennsylvania rather than in Montana. You no longer have a captive market and generation created here in Missouri that has to be sold in Missouri. It can now be sold anywhere. Arizona, California, Nevada, Michigan, Oklahoma, Oregon, and Virginia are all states that have suspended, reduced, or repealed their deregulation dreams. In 2018, voters in Nevada overwhelmingly crushed deregulation on the ballot initiative financed by one-time presidential candidate Tom Steyer. Proponents of deregulation love to tout Texas as a model. It's also unique because it's one part of the state is regulated and one part of the state is deregulated. Texas is blessed with abundance of natural gas as a part of their mix. Yet even in Texas, the part of the state that is regulated has lower prices than the part that is deregulated. Speaking of Texas, deregulation would mean the end of baseload power plants. No one is going to spend $1 billion to open a natural gas or nuclear facility without a customer base. You'll be left with more and more solar and wind generation. Just as Texas learned during Winter Storm Uri, you cannot run a grid without an appropriate backup for when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. What would happen to companies like Evergy? We would divest our plants after you force us to sell them. They would go to the highest bidder, potentially folks from out of state. Energy generation would no longer be regulated here in Jefferson City. That's not to say there's no regulation, but instead the regulators would move back to Washington, D.C., and in Evergy's case, Little Rock, Arkansas, where SPP is headquartered. The local ties to the communities, many of the hundreds of back office jobs and local control all fade away. Finally, the impact on customers is worth mentioning. You would see a huge increase in fraud and customer protection complaints. What we see in deregulated territories is confusion. Think about credit card or cable marketing. Companies compete with low-cost offers for electricity that skyrocket after the first few months, leaving customers confused and unaware of what they have just bought. Your constituents, usually the poor and the elderly, will be left sorting through competing claims and offers as they try to keep the lights on. The Massachusetts Attorney General released a report calling it a predatory and broken market and has recommended ending it. This committee is considering a wholesale change in how we generate and deliver power. The scale of disruption you're considering is monumental and should not be taken lightly. It will affect your constituents, your cities, your counties, your schools, and businesses. And I urge you to oppose this change. Happy to take your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yesterday in conversations, I was told that Evergy actually only produces about 25% of the electricity that you sell. Is that true?
No, remember we're part of the Southwest Power Pool, but no,
In fact, I think we're 100%. I'm not sure what they're referring to because we, as a part of the SPP, we have to be able to cover our native load. You can't be a part of the SPP and not produce your generation, plus the reserve margin on top of that.
Okay, so Evergy West does.
Evergy West is, so there's two different things here. We're talking about Evergy as a whole, and then there are operating companies. So yes, Evergy West is short of generation for sure, which was one of the reasons why we worked on Senate Bill 4, was so that we could build generation so that Evergy West is able to do it. If you look at Evergy Metro has a surplus of energy.
And so Evergy West, that's a Kansas company? Is that the Kansas side?
Evergy West Evergy Missouri West and Evergy Missouri Metro. So they're both Missouri. There are two separate operating companies within Missouri.
Okay, if you come by my office, I can see the boundaries of those.
Yep.
And so the states that have embraced this have just sell off. They're required for the investor owns to sell off generation.
That's right. So we would have to sell generation off. We would still be a T&D or a pole and wires company, if you will. But what that would mean is that generation is no longer something that we control or own. In fact, if you think about it, in a time of low supply and high demand, I don't know that you'd want an energy company that was selling at the cost the market will bear, because that's pretty high right now. This is probably not the time there was probably a time to consider deregulation in the 90s when there was excess supply. That would have made more sense. But when you have low supply and high demand, market forces tell you that energy cost is going to go up, which is what you're seeing in all of these deregulated states. You're seeing their energy costs go up much quicker than the regulated states are.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
You might have referenced it. I'm sorry if someone talked about it earlier. But I do have a question. So in the deregulated state, say it happens here, Evergy sells their generation, who is then responsible for the poles and wire at that point in time?
So what I think, and I think how
maybe
this
someone
goes,
coming up next can speak to it also.
What's that?
Maybe another witness can speak to it also.
No, what I think your question is who's responsible for poles and wires?
And maintenance. So their storm comes through, line at my folks' house goes out, we're on Evergy.
Yep.
Who would come fix it?
They would still be, the poles and wires company would still be Evergy, and they would still be regulated by the PSC. What this changes is who generates the electricity and sells it into the market.
All right, perfect, thanks.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Next in favor, please come forward. And again, drop off your witness form if you would, and let us know who you are.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chair Searpoint and members of the committee. My name is Abby Foster. I'm with the Retail Energy Advancement League. We're a nonprofit national organization that represents retail energy suppliers. They would be the companies that would be coming into Missouri if this bill passed to sell electricity to customers. Those companies, several of them also own generation assets, and so they would also be the companies who would be investing in generation or purchasing assets from the utilities if the utilities did not want to keep their assets as a private company. In Missouri, as you're fully aware, it's a monopoly utility state, so customers only have the option of their investor-owned utility if they're in that service territory, or their cooperative or their municipal-owned to choose who their electric supplier is. They also supply or manage the transmission and distribution for the electric system and the distribution. The utilities receive a guaranteed profit and rate of return on everything that they build and manage for poles and wires, and also generation and power plants. In a monopoly system, that creates an environment where the more you build, the more you receive for profit and rate of return from ratepayers, and that's just the nature of a monopoly market. The problem is, in Missouri, the utilities have not kept pace on generation to supply customers. As the last witness said, Evergy, and I'm glad you asked the follow-up question about whether it was Evergy West or Evergy Metro, Evergy is short 77% of the electricity to serve for in-state generation to serve customers in Missouri, and that's according to their own IRP and information that they've published in the rate cases. So in a state like that, where you have companies buying from the wholesale market, but as a monopoly, or buying from independent power producers or other generation facilities that are not theirs, you have customers who are having one foot in the competitive market and one foot in the monopoly market that are being served by an entity that, if the market does have volatility, they can go back to customers and recoup those costs through the fuel adjustment clause. And so in a competitive market where the wholesale market is where suppliers are purchasing from, when they have customers on a fixed rate offer, there's no mechanism for them to go back to the ratepayers when the markets are volatile. Those customers have a fixed rate, whether they've locked it in for 6 months or 5 years. For that period of time, if the market has any type of volatility, the supplier cannot go back to them and ask for them to pay for that volatility. But in a monopoly market, if you have a utility who's purchasing from the wholesale market, as a monopoly, they can go back and recoup those costs. So it was never intended to be in a monopoly market, the ability for these utilities to be playing in and out of a competitive market as a monopoly. So when the utilities are short that much generation, it really creates a problem for the customers because they're going to the market at inopportune times when supply costs are really high or supply is low and demand is high, and it creates a situation where customers are overpaying for electricity because they have no options and no safeguards. That's in 2023 where Evergy was on how much they had to serve customers. In the 2023 Integrated Resource Plan that Ameren published that tells kind of here's where we are with our assets, what the customer demand is, what it's going to cost to maintain the system, they proposed that it would be $13 billion to replace half of their generation that's coming offline in the next 10 years. There's a lot of coal-fired power plants that are at the end of their life cycle that are scheduled to be retired, and that was in 2023 prior to the increase in customer demand that's coming to Missouri. Missouri Public Service Commission recently held hearings about Ameren's proposed rate increase, and customers were very clear that they already can't afford what's been increased over the last several years. I think it was $17 on average for the individual customer, which might not seem like a lot, but for someone on fixed income it is. And when you don't have options, they have no choice but to pay it. There's another way. In my testimony last month in front of the House committee, I said there were 22 states that have some type of competition with the utility. Today, I can happily say there's 23 states because Utah just passed legislation that allows their commercial and industrial customers to shop. But there's 23 states that have some type of competition that's allowed with the electric utility. In 14 of those states, it's a fully restructured market like what's being proposed here today for Missouri. And customers don't have to pay for the generation that's built. It's all risk is all put on the independent power producer who's investing in the state with their own dollars. And so as you have new technology that's coming out, say there's new patented technology for nuclear that comes out that makes it more affordable in the next 5 years, if you have a monopoly environment where the ratepayers are having to pay for the life cycle of a plant that your utilities have invested in and new technology comes out that's better, more efficient, lower carbon and cheaper, you can't go and switch to that newer, better, affordable generation because you're forced to pay for that utility monopoly's cost for the life cycle of that plant. In a competitive market, you have a newer generation fleet. Companies are investing $500 million, $1 billion in generation, and you actually have a sheet in front of you that compares Ohio and Pennsylvania's generation assets to Missouri. In the last 6 years, there have been 8 new natural gas facilities added in those 2 states. I choose Ohio and Pennsylvania because they have the closest renewable portfolio standard to Missouri. I don't choose a state like Massachusetts to compare to Missouri because Massachusetts has a completely different market requirement for what the generation resources are. They require 63% of the renewable energy to be for the supply that's offered. And so when you're looking at rates and you're looking at what the makeup of these individual states are and you're doing comparisons, you can't just look at the data at face value. You need context. And so nothing if not predictable. Utilities will often say, look at the Massachusetts rates compared to Missouri's rates. We don't want to be Massachusetts, but the majority of that bill is made up through policy changes, through distribution costs, have nothing to do with the supply costs. And so a state like Massachusetts has other riders, electric vehicles, energy efficiency programs. And so you need to look at price performance between the states. What have the rates done in Missouri starting at one point in time, and how much have they increased to now compared to a state like Pennsylvania? Where were they at one point in time, and what have they increased to now? So for price performance, if you look at the 14 competitive states against the monopoly states, competition has done better on price performance, on reliability, on decarbonization, and for the amount of generation that has been built for every customer load request. On building generation, looking at the monopoly states as well, I have several examples in the FAQs that we provided in advance of other states where it was either a carbon capture sequestration plant, nuclear, natural gas, and even wind and solar, that when the utilities went into the Public Service Commission and said it was going to cost this much, the costs were overrun, the projects were delayed, and ratepayers were on the hook for paying for that. Some of those facilities are never even going to generate 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, and ratepayers are still going to pay for it. The competitive market is better suited to be building generation for these customers. It puts the risk on the private company rather than the individual customers. In summary, Senate Bill 487 will remove the risk of Missouri's costly upcoming investments, shift the risk from the ratepayers to the investor, and create options for customers, reducing the costs and allowing you to transition and update your aging infrastructure reliably and affordably.
Thank you. you mentioned Utah just recently has joined this. So, and for the commercial, I guess large and medium-sized commercial. So as they convert to these competitive providers, how do they recover their fixed costs? Do that just shifts to the people left on the grid on the old way?
So at a state that's a partially restructured state, so a state like Utah or Virginia, where some customers can shop, but the rest of the customers stay with the utility, and then the utility still has a monopoly on the generation, because especially in a state like Virginia and Utah, and in Missouri, frankly, where generation has not kept pace with customer, there's no stranded costs because they're buying so much from the market. There's not anything that's left over. It would be one thing if they had excess supply. So if they had too much generation, then all of a sudden you had some customers leaving and going with a supplier, and then they had all of this generation, what to do with it. But even then, you're in an independent system operator, you're in MISO and you're in SPP, you can always sell excess generation to the grid.
But a customer that's using 20 megawatts, in those 20 megawatts, the bill is fixed costs, some fixed costs. And once they shift to one of your companies, those fixed costs are gone, and they must be borne by the rest of the consumers that are still left on the grid?
So I'm just talking about generation supply. The rest of those fixed costs are paid for by the supplier customer, whether they're enrolled with a supplier or a utility. So there's things like energy efficiency programs. If there's any type of programs that are required by the legislature to be charged, all of the distribution costs, in some states the capacity costs too, all of those are paid for by supplier customers. Those don't shift away.
Well, how do they know what they are? If the IOU owns the substations, owns all the stuff that has to have maintenance, how do they know how much fixed cost to put on that bill?
So in all of these states, and every state is different, but in all of them there's an agreement between the utility and the supplier community on who's going to charge for what. So for example, in Virginia, the suppliers also charge the capacity and transmission costs. But if the supplier is sending a bill that has all of the costs, so supplier consolidated billing, they're collecting on behalf of the utility and then paying out to the utility. Some states it's dual billing, so the supplier is just charging for their costs and the utility is just charging for their costs, or it's utility consolidated billing where the utility collects the supply and generation charges and then pays that out to the supplier. If it's the utility consolidated billing or supplier consolidated billing, each of those entities is paying each other a per bill fee to collect, to kind of carry that debt and collect as the liability. But either way, no one is not paying the charges. They're still made whole.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry.
I got one. Looking at your chart here, do you know what, I'm just looking at Pennsylvania because I don't want to try and look up Ohio and then get lost and not be able to talk anything. Do you know when Pennsylvania deregulated?
1996.
Okay, I found the same thing. Just want to make sure we're on the same page. So the natural gas plants are the only ones that came online post, I guess, deregulation. The nuclear was in a regulated energy market. And I just based on what the prior gentleman said, the time to do it would have been maybe in an energy abundance, I guess, so to speak. And they put on, if my math is correct, with the nuclear generation in 15 years, like 75 million megawatts, if my math can be correct here, of nuclear generation in that short period of time. I'm sure there's maybe some small plants that got built between 90 and 2004. Just anything to say to that?
Yeah, so nuclear is incredibly costly on high capital upfront costs, right? So there's been no nuclear commercial investments in the United States since like the 70s and 80s when a lot of these plants were built. And actually the cost of the nuclear is actually what drove Pennsylvania to look at, okay, what are our options? Because our ratepayers cannot afford to shoulder these costs. And so by opening up the market, you had private companies coming in and purchasing those nuclear facilities using private dollars and then competing in the market with them. And so it took the risk off of the ratepayers to pay for the rest of essentially the mortgage on that nuclear plant and put it on a private company, which today Constellation owns a lot of that nuclear. They just reopened 3 Mile Island for Microsoft. But we're looking at nuclear, and I know nuclear is a great option because it's baseload and zero carbon, but nobody, whether it's a private company or a monopoly utility company, has built new nuclear since the late 1900s. It has significant upfront
That
costs.
seems wild to say the late 1900s. I'm sorry, I just had to make that.
I know.
It makes me feel really old.
Yeah.
But
if you look at the examples and the FAQs I sent, you can look at the attempts to build nuclear and look at the overrun costs and the delays that, one of those plants never even came online and customers are paying for it.
But do you think some of that can be blamed on government?
So DOE has...
And regulations and whatever else comes from it. Do you think some of our... No, I'm getting a little in the weeds here, but I just get frustrated to a certain degree if some of these plants are closing for no other reason than the federal government has basically regulated them to say they have to close down.
Nuclear is one entity that I would welcome the government to be more cautious than not.
And I don't disagree, but I mean, let's talk about coal for a second. I was informed, you know, we've got coal that's getting mined here in the United States. I think it's either Indiana or Ohio, and not a lick of it's being burnt in the United States. It's all getting put on a river and shipped and gone to other countries. And oh, by the way, if you follow the jet stream, the air that comes out of those countries comes across us. So it's not good enough to burn here. It's not clean enough to burn here, allegedly, but we're just shipping it right on out.
I think coal is a better example to talk about for that. So states, it's up to individual states what their renewable portfolio standard is. In Missouri, it's only 15%. You could continue to run coal for a very, very long time. You could extend the life cycle of several of your plants that are scheduled to come offline in the next 10 years if you make investments in them.
If not for the federal government.
No, it's state.
Right?
It's a state law. Federal government doesn't require your renewable portfolio standard.
But they've got Clean Air Act.
So EPA
And-
111D, right? So you had to put scrubbers on your plants. There were certain things that you had to do. If you were a private company, you made those investments. You made sure that your plant was viable and you could still compete in the market. From what I understand, Rush Island was brought offline early before the end of its life cycle because investments were not made in those scrubbers, and the company who owned that plant should have been investing in it all along. And so it was more viable for them to take it offline, get ratepayers to pay for them to be securitized and take it offline, and for them to be paying to be built, ratepayers to be paying for them to build replacement generation for that, than for them to use their money to invest in it and keep it online for as long as it was supposed to. It came offline early. So in a private market, those coal-fired power plants, they're going to continue to burn until it's no longer viable in the market and it's not bidding into the market successfully.
I hope someone can follow up maybe from some of their companies and speak to that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next in opposition, please come forward. Warren, do I understand you're retiring?
Pardon me?
I understand you're retiring?
I am.
So
yes.
this may be your last hurrah?
It might be. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. My name is Warren Wood. I'm an engineer. I'm Ameren, Missouri's Legislative and Regulatory Vice President. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to this legislation. When I review legislation like this, I'm reminded of how fortunate we are at times to live in the show-me state. Electric deregulation is not a new concept. Enron helped push the passage of the National Energy Policy Act in 1992, which set the stage for what we now often refer to as electric deregulation. Electric deregulation is a bit of a misnomer since your local electric service provider, at least in terms of how they appear on the bill, would likely remain unchanged. What does change is your local electric service provider is forced to sell off their electric generating plants, typically to an outside marketer or to an unregulated subsidiary who ends up effectively being a marketer. These marketers then generate electricity and sell it on the market at what prices the market will bear. The sales pitch or advocacy for this is typically centered around the idea that competition reduces cost and improves the range of service offerings. I fully concur with this message in the vast majority of business cases. I make an exception here, which I'd be happy to answer questions on why if you want to dig into that. So coming back to the show me state theme, what has decades of electric deregulation yielded for customers? Well, the American Public Power Association, which the investor-owned utilities are not associated with in any way, issues reports, has for years on electric rates in regulated versus deregulated states. The report, which I'm happy to provide to the committee, I understand we'll do so afterward, shows that electric deregulation has not resulted in lower rates for customers. It's resulted in higher rates, generally higher looking across all the states. This is all the different states, their different rates. It rates them by region. It's a lot of great information, lays it out cents per kilowatt hour for the customers through time and trends and all that. It's a lot of good stuff. Now, the other significant impact, and this is probably the one I've seen more individually as I've moved around the country, is that as you sell off your power plants, what have you done for reliability of electricity in the region? Time and time again, we're seeing that states that have deregulated are struggling to have the generation resources to keep the lights on during extreme hot and cold weather events. Fundamentally, this comes down to marketers not having sufficient incentives, there's not a business case, or they don't have regulatory requirements or all the above to make sure they have generation resources to serve peak periods of extreme weather when the generation is only needed very occasionally. And so there's not a good market to have that generator sitting there, not operating most of the time except during peak periods. And for me, these are not just observations, looking at what's happening in other states. My work as a consulting engineer, working the design, construction, and startup of power plants around the United States, moved me 13 times in 11 years from east to west coast and several places in between. I lived in California in the mid-90s and experienced several multi-day outages because they did not have generation resources to serve a peak during a heat wave. Now, in terms of current time, all we have to do is look around at how extreme weather events, and we are seeing more of them now in the winter and summer than we used to, are impacting other states. More often than not, the states experiencing the outages, or at least generation-related outages, are deregulated. And we're also seeing the price spikes associated with shortages of electric supply in those states more than others. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to this legislation. I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you. So in a state that's deregulated, who has ultimate responsibility for making sure the reliability is there?
That's a really good question. In fact, I was making sure I understood the breadth of that question. I talked to an independent system operator person that works at RTO. There's multiple states included in it this morning to make sure I understood that. And they said that's one of the classic challenges is because, if you look at a regulated state, Ameren, Missouri, Evergy, others, we have distinct requirements laid out in terms of providing safe and adequate service at just and reasonable rates. And if we're not doing our part to keep the lights on, they have means through regulatory mechanisms to reach out and grab us by the throat. If you are in a deregulated state, there's a lot of overlapping confusion about who really has the planning requirements and enforcement to make sure you're generating resources. Now, they do things like they issue high capacity market prices if there's shortage of capacity to try to encourage people to build those generation plants. But in the end, it's North American Electric Reliability Corporation that issues reliability requirements by region, and they've got large parts of MISO and others that in red right now because they don't see sufficient generation resources being built. There aren't sufficient requirements or incentives to build those peak units. And so in the end, I'd like to give you a straight answer. Oh, it's MISO or it's SPP or it's NERC. Individual marketers, unless they've signed up for that spinning reserve peak capability, which is not an attractive business profile for most of them to enter to, who do you enforce that on? I mean, when I had outages in California, I had a bunch of fine print in there that said if there was basically a lack of market electricity, they could black me out, and they did.
Any other questions for this witness? Senator Curtis.
Sorry, just a lot of curiosity today.
Yes.
You heard some of the inquiries I had of the prior witness. Can you speak any to that and some of the decisions on Rush Island? That was one that was used as an example. Like I said on the chart here, there were 1,000,000 megawatts of nuclear built pre-deregulation. 1990 was the last nuclear plant. The next natural gas generation plant was built at 7.9 million megawatts in 2004, so it was another 96, so 8 years after they deregulated, and then a few have gone up. Can you just speak to some of what was said? I feel like from what I've heard you all say in the past, it's not necessarily been your decision to want to shut it down. It's been, it made no viable sense for us and our ratepayers for us to put the money into it to make it meet new federal
requirements.
Correct.
Well, specifically to Rush Island, I was somewhat fascinated to hear some of the assessments of Rush Island and why. Looking at Rush Island, I mean, this was an issue where there was clearly a difference of opinion between us and ended up being EPA regarding the need for scrubbers on the unit. When we came back and saw that the court decision you were going to have to put scrubbers on the unit, then you look at, is it worth it on a plant that's 40 plus years out there to put over $1 billion of capital investment in it and drive up electric rates dramatically for a unit that's relatively old? And we looked at that versus the impact on customers versus shutting it down and building new generation resources to serve that load. And it was definitely of lower cost to build natural gas-fired generation for customers. And that's what we're in the process of doing right now. That's what we laid out in the resource plan. It was all focused through a regulatory process with oversight input by all the different customer groups to keep current and future costs for customers at the lowest possible level while providing reliable service. If I just have an interest in serving a market, what's my focus? Well, I want to make sure I can keep my customer base, and I'm going to try to keep my rates as low as possible, be attractive. But do I necessarily, unless there's specific requirements laid out, and this is a challenge across the country, that I have units sitting there available to serve peak periods? That's not a particularly attractive business profile for me to have. And so you look at, but in Missouri, we have strict requirements. We have a load planning process with input by a lot of people to keep rates down while maintaining reliability. And that's a problem. We don't see that second bridge in a lot of the unregulated states.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Warren.
Okay, thank you.
How many more people want to testify in favor? How about against? Okay. I'm going to cut people back to 3 minutes now, okay? Shut up. So the next person, please, in favor, come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Doug Galloway. I'm appearing today on behalf of Ford Motor Company out of Kansas City. I want to thank the sponsor for introducing Senate Bill 487 and facing the headwinds that he's enabled. Ford supports the concepts contained in Senate Bill 487. Give you a little background about our Kansas City plant employs about 9,500 employees and thousands of related supplier vendor employees as well. We have 2 lines of production there, and we have 3 shifts every day, 7 days a week. So we're at full capacity production at our Kansas City plant. When Ford expanded over the past decade, the economic development rates helped that expansion to keep our Missouri plant competitive with other Ford plants across the country. Now that plant is at capacity, and there are no economic development rates available, and our Missouri energy costs have become one of our largest challenges at the plant today. Our experience in other states shows that when implemented correctly, and I think that's the key words, implemented correctly, a competitive marketplace benefits consumers. One of the things that I think is important to know, in an earlier life that I had, I worked for a company that went through a deregulated motion, and that was the telecom industry. We cried that the sky was falling and we were all going to go belly up and things were going to go terrible and the consumers were going to go bad and things weren't going to be served and it was going to be a terrible catastrophe. Well, that has proved to be untrue. We did survive and we are prospering. The telecom industry is as well. And the consumers demanded that we become deregulated, and we unbundled our networks, and that's where we are today. You may recall years ago there was a dime lady, Candace Bergen, promoted long-distance rates at 10 cents a minute. Paying 10 cents a minute today would be unheard of and uncalled for. So deregulation can work if it's done correctly. And we think Senate Bill 487 does have the concepts to do it properly and correctly. And with that, I'll try and answer questions you may have.
Thank you. I'm not sure the phone company, because the technological changes, I'm not sure the power industry is going to go through something like that, cell phones and fiber optics for
At the time,
long distance is too cheap to
I was going to say, at the time the deregulation
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Arnie C., AC Dinoff, State Public Advocate. I filed my form this morning for the committee, and I'm very opposed to Senate Bill 487. This bill is not ready for prime time. It's not ready for Senate debate on the floor. It needs many amendments, and the first amendment is to protect Missouri consumers. I'm afraid the utility bills will increase for Missourians, whether it's a commercial user, an industrial user, or residential user. Missouri consumers will pay the energy bill. Every time that we buy goods or services, it'll be equated to Missourians. This is a very complicated law. Not all the information and facts have come about. There's not been ample discussion, not much debate, and digestion of important questions. As a matter of fact, haven't heard many of the questions that get to the crux of the problem to ensure that Missourians are the priority and not outside interests who are trying to make a profit on Missourians and upon our state. We need enforcement and oversight of the Public Service Commission to remain in favor of the consumers and the residents of Missouri and not outside special interests. For those reasons, I highly disapprove and oppose SB 487.
Thank you, Artie. Any questions for this witness? Thank you. Thank you. Coming forward. Next in favor, please come forward.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Kara Stark. I'm here on behalf of General Motor Company. Just echoing some of the sentiments that have already been said specifically by Mr. Galloway with Ford Motor Companies. We also have a plant in Wentzville. The plant employs over 4,500 people, and we've made investments of $1.5 billion. Very recently, as the electric costs continue to rise, GM wants to support legislation that ensures reliable and affordable electricity. We echo the sentiments that when properly done, a competitive market can foster a utility environment that is beneficial for consumers. We provided a letter of testimony to the House committee that recently heard the bill, so I've attached that letter to my testimony today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Can you tell us, do you know what Ford pays per megawatt hour?
So I'm General Motors, and I do not.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Do you know what General Motors pays per megawatt hour?
I don't, but I'm happy to get that information for you. I just don't have it here with me.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next in opposition, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jared Hankinson, representing the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Will not belabor points that have been made, but will emphasize when we speak to members of the Missouri Chamber of Commerce, one of the things that we hear is that reliability and price consistency is of the utmost importance to some of our members. As you've heard from some of the industry experts that have testified before me, the provisions within Senate Bill 487 do threaten that reliability and price consistency, and that's something that we are not in support of. Additionally, you've heard how the provisions within Senate Bill 487 might make it more challenging for our investor-owned utilities to invest in new energy generation units, and I think all of the members of this committee are well aware of the kind of energy cliff that Missouri faces and how critical it is for us to be in a position to invest in new energy generation units. So for those reasons, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce stands against Senate Bill 487, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for this witness? Seeing none.
Thank you very much.
Next in favor, please come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tyler Travers, here today on behalf of Renew Missouri. We are in support of Senator Schroer's SB 487. We believe it's an excellent capitalist free market idea that would improve innovation and investment in the state, as you heard from previous witnesses from General Motors and Ford, and we just want to go on record in support.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next in opposition, please come forward. It must be all the people in opposition. Next in favor, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Dolan, Executive Director of MOSEA, representing the members of MOSEA and the full spectrum of solar energy industry in Missouri. We appreciate the committee's work and the sponsor bringing forth this legislation and the dialogue we've heard today. We just wanted to chime in favor of this legislation because of the approach you've taken in the IRP section of SB4, because of the other deep dives that we're now doing in utility legislation, thanks to many of your leadership initiatives. We have the obligation, I think, and the opportunity to study further, to take an all of the above approach. And we could just see this one, as Renew Missouri and others do, as looking at all generators welcome and all consumers thought of in the midst of all that we're doing, with heavy respect for the testimony of Warren and Jason, but also Abby, who came from Pennsylvania. There are other states who've done it. There is a debate to be had. We feel the issue should move forward. And I know definitely from the ground game, but many, many years ago, in the district of the sponsor, which I represented, there are many different opinions, many different sources. That very GM plant, rural electric cooperatives, Ameren, and it's time. It's time to dive in like we have in so many other ways across the utility spectrum, do better work, think of the consumer and the options before us. And for that, Mosia testifies in favor of this legislation.
In the states that have deregulation, are there solar companies that are part of their mix?
Any time that we've dove in and we've had a meeting with the commission, I hope bears some fruit in the rulemaking process on IRP. Anytime we're going for a more robust program and we're challenging our IOUs or our other utility providers, we're opening up options for them, and it definitely increases the renewables. So it's something that we get a shot to generate more, because whether you're selling it out, whether you're keeping it in, you're in the game and you're wanting to comply with the requirements at SBP or MISO and do better, and that works for us.
But if you are in a state that's competitive and you've got customers that pay you directly, that you solicit and join your grid, since solar is only good half the day at best, how do you provide them power other than that? I mean, other people backfill then, I guess, in the evening?
I would never disagree with grid stabilization concerns from the munis, co-ops, and smaller operators to the larger, but we do produce, and if you look at the efficiency of coal, it's down a lot sometimes too. So I think we compete well on that front. It's the deep dive that you do when you think of other options that provides an opportunity, like the advancement of community solar last night in the House, that will pop 5 megawatts at a clip, all the way on the back 40 for communities that truly want it. If you look at a solar compromise that advanced in the House and may come over, you can look at large solar, fix the tax issue you've worked very hard on, and others, and provide a vehicle for more generation. Likewise, although controversial, even QIP on gas generation, even considering nuke. So there is opportunity there across the generation spectrum, and I'm here to promote DERs and the DER study funding that'll be coming over from the House to finally give us the value or cost of solar. So yes, we have some limitations, but we want to be invited to the party. We're a minor player in it, so thus I'm last.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Senator McCray.
Good morning. So I do appreciate what you're saying. As someone who was part of the discussions on Senate Bill 4, there was emphasis by everybody involved that this new, QIP for anything that's part of the integrated resource plan, there was an insistence in that room that they were energy source neutral. And so to me, that means if we're energy source neutral and we're not picking winners or losers, at the very least, the legislature should be a little bit more neutral and less hostile towards some things. If you believe what happened in the negotiations on Senate Bill 4 were sincere. So that's all I want to say. I heard that loud and clear, and I kind of have a new sense of direction moving forward that, Senate Bill 4 passed with some great compromises, and I don't think we should be so hostile as a legislature to some forms of energy sources.
Well, thank you, Senator, for those comments. I immensely appreciate them. The first types of QIP or ISRIS were around when I was in the Senate, and I had that GM plant in my district, so you can imagine I was on more your side. But I do appreciate all that the utilities do, and if they're going to do that, and we're going to have a more robust IRP, I couldn't agree more with your comments that you can look to Virginia, you can look to Michigan, as the commission staff is doing, to have a welcome table. I believe it correlates very well to the efforts of those behind this bill and the excellent testimony from Abby Foster from Pennsylvania that there was an option. There is a website. Consumers can have choice. It can work, but it's our deep dive and the great work all of you and your staffs do that make it possible for us to advance the ball down the field. We may or may not get there, but it is surely better to dive in. And when promises are made in those environments, I definitely welcome it. I was in an elevator yesterday with a former member of the JCAR staff, and I said, who's replaced you? Because I think that's my summer. I'd love to work with you. I'd love to work with the senator and all the staff to make sure all the promises that we're trying to get through, from small solar and net metering, and the big stuff that's been a big part of this legislature this year, come together and work better for Missourians. And that's why MOSIA is more present than ever and just wanting to be a small part of the equation. And in this case, enthusiastically supporting the senator and the chance for choice and opportunity and deep dives to come.
Right, exactly. And I do agree. I have an amazing staff, especially one particular person. So.
Well, I watched and still enjoy Charlie's Angels.
No, we'll see no further questions. Thank you, Senator. Next in favor, please come forward.
Oh, there we go. Good morning. Is that better? Chairman Sirpoy, members of the committee, Frank Plesha, representing the Missouri industrial energy consumers. You know, it's always a hard thing to follow a former senator, especially the esteemed Senator Dolan, but I'll do so. But I just want to echo our support for SB 487. Thank you.
Next in favor, please come forward.
Good afternoon. Melissa Vatter of Missouri Coalition for the Environment. Just want to go on record in support of this bill. We think that this will facilitate competition and innovation, which should facilitate more renewable energy in the state.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Anybody else in favor? Okay, I think that's everybody in favor and opposition. Anybody for information purposes? Come forward. Sorry, first come, first serve, so you'll be next.
Okay. I don't know who else. Good morning, committee members, Chair Sirpoy. John Kaufman on behalf of the Consumers Council of Missouri. Our focus is residential consumers, and we have mixed feelings about this legislation and have not quite decided what our position is. We have been wary of what's generally called deregulation over the years, and I would say that there are years when sometimes the states that are, usually what it's, I guess a more accurate way to talk about this is re-regulation. You're just regulating differently. You're not completely deregulating because there has to be rules of the game. But often the rates for residential customers are lower, but I would characterize it as more volatile in other states. But there are times when it works. There are certainly benefits to having the entity that is building your power plants have the risk completely on themselves. In my mind, one of the most difficult things and one of the most dangerous things that has happened over the years, and particularly if Senate Bill 4 becomes law, is that the risk is being foisted upon the ratepayers. The utilities are still making their profits, but the risk and return has now been kind of bifurcated. So the public is now bearing the risk anyway, even though we're under a monopoly regime. And so looking at the cost that we're likely to see with Senate Bill 4, I think we're open to looking at alternatives. Under a re-regulated retail choice environment, you would not have construction work in progress. You would not have necessarily these security. You wouldn't have to be paying for power plants that have been shut down like Rush Island, and you wouldn't be paying for power plants that aren't yet serving you either. And you would know that the power plants that were serving you, those entities, they had all the risk on themselves. And so they're going into it, like you would in a more competitive marketplace where they're risking their own money, and those tend to be more efficient, more economical projects. But there have been a lot of problems. I think reliability is a concern. You got to address that. Another concern that we have that no one else has brought up is kind of the problem with the marketers and sort of the fraudsters. There will be, if residential customers are put into the mix, there's likely going to be these marketers that go out and they wear confusing shirts. They act like utilities, and they go out into these neighborhoods and sign people up for contracts sometimes that are bait and switch contracts. Sometimes they're not contracts that are in their best interest, and it's very confusing stuff. And so I think if you're going to go down this path, you have to put a lot of effort into making sure that the rules are clear and consistent, and residential customers don't get scammed, particularly those in vulnerable communities. So I'm just...
Thank you. I agree. I think the risk on the financial risk is attractive in this proposal. I just don't understand the reliability risk, because I think that's something that is just as important.
And I would say, and this addresses your point, is that every state that has done it differently. So you have half the states doing it, but they're hardly alike each other. You know, the way Illinois is deregulated is very different than California and New York. Texas is completely different. You know, in Illinois, they have a central power authority that the government runs. So, but there's always someone that is supposed to be focusing on it. But I think you sometimes have a problem of sort of diffusion of responsibility. I think that, the Public Service Commission should probably be the final place where reliability is.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you, John. Next, for information purpose, please come forward.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Mariluz Hoyos from Most Policy Initiative. We are a nonprofit that provides nonpartisan research to the Missouri legislature. Today, I will be giving informational testimony on our science note focused on electricity retail choice. Research on how retail choice affects consumer prices shows varied outcomes. Some studies indicate lower prices for residential, commercial, and industrial customers, with effects varying over time. However, a study found that after implementing retail choice, average electricity rates did not change from 1997 to 2012. Other studies suggest that states with retail choice tend to have higher electricity prices compared to those in regulated states. When states adopt retail choice with price freezes or mandatory price cuts, there is an initial price reductions with savings of approximately $50 per year for residential customers. After ending price freezes, electricity rates increased by approximately 1.2 cents per kilowatt hour in retail choice compared to non-retail choice states in subsequent years. However, the inability to isolate retail choice, incomplete data, and other factors that impact electricity prices limit analysis of the effect of retail choice on consumer prices. Restructured states showed sensitivity to natural gas fluctuations, and participation of residential customers tends to be low and has stabilized at around 26% in recent years. Some states, such as Ohio and Massachusetts, have seen growth in customers, but Illinois and Connecticut have experienced declines in participation. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for testifying.
Would you submit that report so that the committee chair can share it with everybody, your written report?
Yes, for sure.
Thank
I can
you.
do that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other? I guess that'd be up to me. No more questions. Thank you very much. Anybody else for information purposes? All righty, that'll conclude the hearing on Senate Bill 487. We're adjourned.